As energy costs continue to rise, millions of Americans are making energy-efficient renovations and upgrades to their homes, adding insulation, replacing old windows, and in some cases, putting solar panels on the roof. There's big money to be made installing and financing residential solar systems, and a lot of bad actors hope to cash in on that. I'm Herb Weisbaum, the Consumer Man, a contributing editor at Checkbook.org.
Welcome to Consumerpedia at Checkbook.org. We're the nonprofit that helps consumers select services, avoid trouble, and save money. Because we don't accept any advertising or take money from any business we recommend, you can rely on Checkbook.org to be completely independent and objective. Now, here's the host of Consumerpedia, America's consumer expert, the Consumer Man, Herb Weisbaum.
Scammers across the country are going door to door pitching free solar energy systems, leaving unsuspecting homeowners with massive debt and shoddy installations, if they get anything at all. Victims have reported losing tens of thousands of dollars to these deceptive solar sales practices. The con job starts with a fast-talking salesperson offering a limited-time offer for a free solar installation. They may promise, although it's a lie, that the total cost of the project will be covered by tax credits and rebates, but you need to act now.
This is just the same old scam we've seen for years, the same home repair scam, the same tin men we've seen the whole time, and a lucrative one.
Ira Reingold is executive director of the National Association of Consumer Advocates.
We're seeing people sold a bill of goods, financing that's unfair, products that are defective, installations that are poor, and people are getting ripped off.
I spoke to Randy, a homeowner in Florida, who was surprised when two solar salespeople just showed up in her driveway unannounced one day.
They did not want to take no for an answer, that is for sure.
They were very aggressive, she told me, and kept pitching a government program that would let her install solar panels on her house for free.
They're very aggressive and they're very pushy and they don't want to leave. So it kind of feels like they're invading your space and trying to force you to do something that you don't want to do.
These door-to-door hustlers use high-pressure sales tactics to trick consumers into signing contracts and taking out high-interest, long-term loans. In some cases, according to Amy Nofsiker at the AARP Fraud Watch Network, the person who shows up at your door may be an identity thief.
The Fraud Watch Network has received reports that some criminals use the door-to-door solar sales pitch as a ruse to get personal information to then further harm you and maybe even commit identity theft. So do not give anyone your personal information that you do not know.
Clearly, there are problems with solar sales and financing. Bad actors who lie and pressure homeowners to sign a contract with them. Let's dig into that some more with a consumer advocate who spent a lot of time investigating the solar marketplace. Annalise Lederer is Senior Policy Counsel at the nonprofit Center for Responsible Lending. She co-authored a report that exposed the shady side of solar financing. Annalise, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Herb, for having me.
So in your report, you looked at a number of major problem areas. Let's start with misleading sales practices. The main market model for solar right now is door-to-door sales, and you found that the sales pitch often misrepresents energy savings and tax savings. Let's start with the lies about energy savings.
Sure. What we've been seeing is that when they try and entice the consumer to enter into the solar contract and get solar, they tell them that you're going to save a ton of money, that it's not really going to cost you anything, and they kind of put out that there's no real money going to be spent by the consumer to get these panels and to maintain them. They say that, you'll get money back potentially when you connect to the grid because you can sell your money back. And so it's very enticing because as a consumer, you think, oh, great, this is an area where I can save money because you can't save on your mortgage, but you possibly can save on your utilities. And so if you can save some money, it makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And let's talk about how they mislead about the tax savings. Homeowners are often told they won't pay anything thanks to government tax credits. There's a lot wrong with that guarantee. Why don't you explain how the tax credit really works?
What the tax credit is a non-refundable tax credit against your federal taxes. So when you file your federal taxes, you'll receive a 30% credit on the cost of the installation and the solar system. And what this does is this tax credit, it is not cash in your pocket. The sellers insinuate that it is really cash in your pocket rather than lowering how much taxes you're going to pay to the government.
So you gave an example in your report that if I bought a solar system for $20,000 and I received the 30% credit, 20,000 times 30% is $6,000. I have a $6,000 federal tax credit. I don't get $6,000 back in cash. I can offset the taxes I owe Uncle Sam by $6,000. Big difference from the sales pitch.
Yes, it is.
Because I got to pay for the entire system up front and then hope to get the credit back when I file my taxes.
Correct.
What about the problem that once you install solar, you'll never get a utility bill again?
So that is not true. All utilities companies do charge at a minimum a monthly hookup fee or connection fee, which might only be $5 or $6, but all of these different types of fees do add up. Also, depending on what your agreement is with the power company, and if you have a battery, how much solar you're actually going to use. So you can sell some of your excess solar back to the grid, depending on the county and the agreement with the energy company. But the issue that comes in is that at certain times of the day, like if you're using a lot of power at night, you're actually going to be pulling from the grid rather than from your own solar panels. So if you have a battery, you're not going to be. So it also depends on what is your usage as well as what is the capacity. Like if you're in a really, really sunny area, you're probably going to produce a lot more solar, be able to sell that back, which will reduce your bills. But if you're not, or if you've got a lot more shade than you should have had, then it's going to affect how much is produced. So your production will affect it. And at some point, you still need energy. So you will end up pulling from the grid.
And again, they say this is guaranteed that you're going to make money. It's not guaranteed that you're going to be able to sell money to the grid or even get money for selling it to the grid, correct?
Correct. And also the agreements about selling to the grid, those can change based on what the energy company feels like.
So these door-to-door solar salespeople's salary is 100% based on commission. So it would seem to give them an incentive to upsell you to a larger system that you need or tell you things that aren't necessarily true to close the deal.
So they'll upsell you in terms of, do you really need 20 panels when actually your roof only needs 14 panels? Because the bigger the unit is, the more money that person gets is based upon commission. So there's always an incentive for this traveling salesperson to upsell you.
And of course, the contract you sign states that all verbal promises, all that great stuff the salesperson told you, are not binding.
But that's written in legalese in a manner where most consumers aren't understanding it. And it's usually placed, in the middle of the contract, so they're not looking at it. Part of that is also happening because a lot of these contracts are done on an iPad. And so people are not actually sitting down with paper and taking a moment to think, really feeling this pressure from these salespeople to sign right away and sign on this iPad immediately instead of taking like a day or two to think about it before you sign it.
2 more shady solar practices, poor installation work, and predatory contracts. And we're going to talk to Annalise about that next. I'm Herb Weisbaum, the Consumer Man, and this is Consumerpedia, powered by Checkbook.org.
At Checkbook.org, we have the answers to your consumer questions 24/7. That's Checkbook.org. We're a unique nonprofit that can help you with select local service providers, avoid trouble, and save money. Because we don't accept any advertising or take money from any business we recommend, you can rely on Checkbook to be completely independent and objective. Our advice is always free. Ratings of local services are available with a subscription. If you live in one of these 7 metro areas and haven't joined Checkbook yet, check us out. Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis-St. Paul, and Washington, D.C. Get your free 30-day subscription by going to checkbook.org/Consumerpedia.
While you can lease solar panels, most solar installation projects are paid with solar loans these days, and there are all sorts of problems caused by the lending process. Annalise, in your report you said, and I found this alarming, quote, "The prevalence and types of harm occurring in the solar finance industry mirror the abuses that led to the subprime mortgage crisis that occurred between 2007 and 2010. It's really that bad, the potential here?"
Yes, because again, this puts the homeowner's home in jeopardy. And that's what we saw during the predatory lending crisis, was that people were losing their homes. The solar loans have a UCC lien applied to them. The lien can cause problems with being able to refinance. And these situations are able to push certain consumers into foreclosure crisis.
You also concluded that consumers are entering into solar financing agreements that leave them in, quote, a worse economic situation than before the door-to-door salesperson visited. How so?
So what ends up happening is that the loan skyrockets due to the way that the financing is structured, or the system does not produce enough or is not working well enough. then what ends up happening is that the consumer has two bills to pay, one to the solar company for the solar loan and one to the power company for the power that they are using. The assumption was, when they entered into this loan, that they would only have to pay one because they wouldn't have to pay for power anymore. But these situations where it doesn't work properly or the terms are shaky, it results in the consumer having to pay two bills. And that second bill, that new power bill, can take away their ability to pay other bills, causing them to potentially go into foreclosure.
Solar companies that go door to door work with a handful of lenders to provide potential customers with access to these special financing programs. That's the crux of the problem, right? That they're working with these lenders that don't do a lot of due diligence to check if they can afford this, etc.
I mean, that's one of the problems. The lenders are not checking to see if the person has really the ability to pay. They're not required to. The other problem is the upselling. People are paying for bigger units than they actually need. They're not getting the full use of that larger unit, but they're paying for that larger unit.
Most of these contracts are presented to the homeowner on an electronic tablet, as you mentioned earlier. The salesperson uses a special online app to get them instant approval, but you question the underwriting process being used to determine who qualifies for these loans.
Right. There's two problems with the contract. So one, with using the iPads, you have the fact that people are really not reading through the materials. And so are they really able to consciously enter into the contract? And then the second problem is, if you're talking to somebody, have you signed a contract 20 minutes, half an hour later, have they really done their due diligence to be able to determine if you really have the ability to pay back this loan?
So oftentimes the price of these solar systems are inflated, and that's being done to disguise the cost of the financing. They're trying to trick the consumer.
Correct. What we're seeing is we're seeing that some of these APRs are just really too good to be true. Instead, what is happening is that these are disguised finance charges. So for example, the borrower may be offered a seemingly attractive interest rate of 1.99 on a $30,000 loan, but it will be informed that the actual cost of the solar system is only $24,000. And so what happens is that the lender pockets that difference. And the consumer isn't aware that the lender is pocketing any money. They think that it's all the total cost of the loan. And one of the ways they're able to do this is because the consumer never actually sees the loan. It goes straight from the financer to the installer. And so the installer knows that the system is really only $24,000, but the consumer thinks that the system is $30,000. And that $6,000 difference, that goes into the lender's pocket.
And that's the big problem of financing your solar system through the salesperson who shows up at your door.
Because if you were paying for that $24,000 solar system in cash, it would only cost you $24,000. But if you take out a loan with this company, it's going to cost you $30,000.
And you may get a better deal if you go through your bank or credit union or something like that.
Exactly. But consumers don't know that. And consumers don't realize that they can ask, what is the cash price? Like if they paid for cash today instead of taking out a loan, what would the price of the system be?
In your report, you warn that some solar companies prey on elderly homeowners. They sell systems to people with dementia. They convince homeowners in their 80s and 90s to sign up for 25-year loans, which they couldn't possibly pay off in their lifetimes. To me, that sounds like elder abuse.
It is. Some of them have morals and some of them don't. It's a very mixed market, and you don't really know who you're working with because you're really just talking to the person who comes to your door. You don't think always to look into other people.
One last problem, shoddy installation work. Here at Checkbook, we're all too familiar with that. It's one thing if something goes wrong with a kitchen remodel, but the potential damage and hassles caused by a lousy solar installation job can cause some serious problems, right?
Right. It brings you back to that issue of having two bills instead of one because the loan still needs to be paid, but you're not getting anything from those solar panels. And so you're therefore still paying a power bill. So instead of your monthly power costing you $100, it's now costing you $200 because you have the same power needs as before, but now you have this loan payment on top of it all.
And what I don't think a lot of people understand is that solar installation needs to be inspected and approved before you can actually turn them on and before they could possibly be connected to the power grid.
Correct. And what sometimes happens is that the lender pays out to the installer the full amount instead of holding back some until there's a confirmation that the unit has been attached correctly to the grid.
So I have a suggestion that would prevent most of the problems we've discussed. Never buy anything, with the exception of maybe Girl Scout cookies from some stranger who shows up at your door. How about that for a solution?
That is one.
I never buy a solar panel, a construction project, or roofing work from somebody who knocks on my door.
I mean, neither do I.
Annalise Lederer is with the Center for Responsible Lending. I put a link to the center's report on shady solar sales in the show notes. Annalise, thank you for all the center does to protect consumers and for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you so much, Herb, for this opportunity. We're glad to really be able to help consumers and try and reach as many consumers to make them aware of the scams that exist.
Clearly, there are a bunch of potential pitfalls for those who want to go solar, and putting solar panels on the roof is something a lot of homeowners want to do. Straight ahead, Checkbook's executive editor with tips on how to hire a good solar contractor. I'm Herb Weisbaum, the Consumer Man, and you're listening to Consumerpedia, powered by Checkbook.org.
Consumerpedia Fast Facts. Solar energy is the most abundant energy resource on Earth. 173,000 terawatts of solar energy continuously strike the Earth. That's more than 10,000 times the world's total energy use. The first silicon solar cell was developed by Bell Telephone Labs in 1954 to power American satellites in space. Solar cells do not produce any emissions, and according to the Wilderness Society, their life cycle emissions are 12 times less than natural gas and 20 times lower than coal. When it comes to generating solar energy, the top 5 states are California, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, and Nevada.
So by now it should be pretty clear that you need to take your time and do your homework before going solar. Checkbook's executive editor Kevin Brassler joins us now with a checklist of things you need to do.
Hey, Herb, and unfortunately it's somewhat of a long checklist, so hopefully we'll get through it quickly, but maybe not.
Well, people can always read the article. You've been covering solar energy projects for many years, so where do we start?
I think really you need to start with finding out what incentives you can get for installing solar. As of right now, there is still a generous federal tax credit. It's equal to 30% of project costs for residential solar work. There's a lot of uncertainty around this tax credit. It's possible the Trump administration and the Republican Congress could kill this tax credit altogether. And in terms of installing solar on your roof, this program has been really critical for this industry. I mean, unless you live in the Sun Belt or Arizona or Nevada or something like that, where there's just lots of direct sunlight every day, the electricity savings from most solar projects, they just won't add up to pay for the big upfront costs of the projects. I mean, these projects typically cost between $8,000 to $20,000, depending on your roof, how much wattage you put up there, and depending on what company you hire. And for most homeowners, unless they're getting this very generous tax credit, it's not going to make financial sense.
There are also many local incentive programs available.
Yeah, and really, I would say the local programs are as important as the federal tax credit in terms of, looking at payback periods. I mean, I realize a lot of homeowners, they'll say, well, I'm willing to pay whatever it takes for me to cut the harm I do the environment in terms of, emissions, in terms of, having a renewable electricity resource on their own roof. But in terms of financial costs, these are really expensive projects. And in some states and in some localities, there are incentives out there that make these projects kind of almost a no-brainer. There's so many generous incentives that, for example, in the District of Columbia, there's a program in place there where, the payback period, if you do this and you get the tax credit and you qualify for the local incentives, payback period is like 3 years. I mean, you almost immediately get back what you paid for in terms of project costs. Mm-hmm. In Maryland, there's some incentives there. They're not as generous as DC, but the payback period is like, 7 or 8 years. But where I live in Virginia, just across the river, there aren't as many incentives. The incentives aren't very generous. And so if I put solar on my roof, my payback period is going to be 12 years. And that goes for around the country. I mean, from state to state, Illinois has a very generous program and has for a while. Whereas other states like Washington State, where you live, Herb, the programs aren't as generous. But in some cities, the city itself will have a program that makes these things a little more optimal in terms of paying for the project. So unfortunately, I really urge people, before you take the plunge on solar, find out what incentives are available. Make sure you're still going to be able to get the federal tax credit to start there, but also find out what's available in your area and make sure you know what you have to do to get it, because sometimes you actually have to, have your project approved in advance to even qualify for the local help.
Are there websites that can help you identify these local rebates?
One is called rewiringamerica.org. They do a pretty good job of staying on top of, the various incentives available. Google's got a pretty nifty website. It's called Project Sunroof. That'll actually help you kind of figure out the cost benefit of doing solar work. You can put in, how much your project's going to cost, and it'll kind of generate for you based on your roof. how much energy it thinks you can generate with solar panels up there.
So going solar is different from other home improvement products because this is not right for every single home. You may not be located in an area or have a roof where this will work.
Part of this, and a big part, is the incentives, but it's also important to find out whether your roof is even a good candidate. It's really important to make sure that your roof has some kind of southern exposure so that it gets, as much direct sunlight as it can during the day throughout the year. You also need to make sure there's not a lot of shade. You really want direct sunlight on these panels. And so for some roofs, they're just not optimal enough. The panels aren't going to be able to generate enough electricity given the orientation of your roof or if there's too much shade on it.
Can this be done on an older roof? Do you need to make sure your roof is new to have this done?
I think you really have to understand that these panels, they're going to be up there and generating electricity for a long time. I mean, most of these panels remain pretty efficient for 15 years or more. They do degrade over time, but, these panels are going to be up there for a long time. And so, I'll give you an example. Like my roof, it's perfect for solar. The back of my roof faces directly southward, so the panels won't even be like from a street view. People from the front of my house won't even see my panels. And I don't have any shade up there. The roof is high enough to where the trees don't interfere with it. But I haven't pulled the trigger on solar yet. First of all, because Virginia's incentives just stink. But secondly, my shingles are like 25 years old and they're still in great shape. I've had a few repairs over the last 5 years and the roofer's like, you're going to get at least another 5-10 years out of these shingles. If I need a new roof or when I need one, I'll probably add solar afterward, so long as the big federal tax credits are around. But until then, I really don't want to pay for someone to install panels onto my old roof and then later on have someone come back, maybe that company, maybe a different company, come out, remove the panels so that a roofer can put on a new roof and then reinstall the panels. And this is a huge problem. We hear about this a lot. Solar companies that install these products, they don't want to bother to come back out and pull them down so a roofer can get up there and put a new roof on and then put them back. Roofers themselves, most of them don't want anything to do with solar panels. And also, they probably shouldn't touch them because they don't have an electrical license to do this work, to reinstall them.
Sure.
So I do think it makes sense, think about the longevity of your roof and proceed with caution. I mean, a lot of the installers will tell you, well, once we put panels up there, you're really protecting those shingles underneath. And that's true. But in my case, for example, 20, 25-year-old roof, I'd wait to put on solar panels until I have new shingles up there.
Okay, so let's say you did your homework, you're ready for solar, you're willing to pay the upfront costs, you have a good roof. What's the most important first step?
As with any big home improvement project, talk to several installers and get price quotes from each. And you need to really make sure you're dealing with an experienced pro. You don't want to be anybody's guinea pig for this thing. You want to make sure you're dealing with an installer that's done lots of these projects and is used to passing inspections, used to getting all the permits required, used to applying for whatever incentives you're going to get or even they're going to get for your project. And by talking to several companies, you'll find that, there are big cost differences from company to company for the exact same project. I mean, our undercover shoppers collected price quotes for several roofs in 7 major metro areas and found that, usually the highest prices we were quoted were thousands of dollars more than the lowest ones for the exact same thing. I think you also want to make sure that the company has a license to do electrical work and make sure that it will secure all the right permits. A big important part about solar in terms of cost effectiveness is being able to sell energy you produce and don't use back to the grid. And so you want to make sure that the contractor you use has done that work before and can get approvals from your utility company to make all this work.
So when it comes to solar, does size matter?
As you collect proposals from companies, one thing I hope you'll notice is that companies are really focused on, okay, what size system should we install on your roof? The real sweet spot here is it's having enough panels to generate enough electricity to cover your needs for the upcoming year. So what you don't want is too small a system. Some installers, they're going to quote you too small a system because then it's less expensive. And so it seems like, oh, you're getting a deal from this company because the project costs are lower than others. But then now you're not generating enough electricity to cover what you need. Another danger is, in many states, is installing too many panels, because in a lot of states, basically what happens is the utilities say, well, you can only install enough capacity to meet your needs for the year. You can't put like a big megawatt array up there and generate a lot of electricity and then sell it back to the grid. I mean, in other words, you're not going to get rich off solar. Even if you have a huge roof or you want to put panels all over your yard or whatever, the limit is usually what you're going to use for the year, and any excess electricity you generate beyond that it's going to go back to the grid, but you're not going to get paid for it.
So what about batteries? Do you need to have batteries to store the solar energy generated during the day?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what you want to get out of this, right? Let's say you have a generator in case of blackouts or whatever, and instead of using a generator, well, yeah, these batteries might make sense. That way, when the power goes out, you still have a source of electricity. But, most homeowners, they really don't need these batteries. In a bad year, yeah, maybe your power is going to go up for a few days. These batteries aren't going to store several days worth of electricity anyways. And so I'd say overall, these batteries just represent a big added cost for most homeowners and probably you don't need to pay for them, especially if you can sell your excess electricity back to the grid instead of just storing it.
Solar can be good for some people, but you have to do your homework before you have it installed on your roof.
I feel like I've been dumping on solar projects during this podcast. And I actually do think if the incentives are there, if the tax credit's there, if your roof is optimal, and especially if you want to stay in your home for a long time, these projects do make sense. But, there are a lot of other ways you can save on energy at home. A lot of our homes, they just unnecessarily waste lots of energy. You don't have weather stripping around your doors, or you have other ways that your home just passively leaks out warm air in the winter and cool air in the summer. And so I really think the first step is check your insulation levels, seal up these leaks. You'll save a lot of energy that way without having to spend $10,000 on solar panels.
A lot of good information. We have much more about this at checkbook.org. Kevin Brassler is our executive editor. Thank you, Kevin.
All right, Herb.
Well, that's it for this edition of Consumerpedia. We hope you'll rate the episode and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Remember, we release new episodes every other Thursday. Another way you can support this show is to follow us on Consumerpedia on Facebook and Instagram, and at My Consumerpedia on X, formerly Twitter. I'm Herb Weisbaum. Thank you for listening.
Consumerpedia is a public service of Checkbook.org. We're a unique nonprofit that helps you save money and make smarter choices. You can count on Checkbook to help you find the best services and avoid the worst, with local ratings that are accurate and unbiased. If you live in or around these 7 cities and haven't joined Checkbook yet, check us out. Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Minneapolis-St. Paul, Seattle, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. To get your free 30-day subscription, go to checkbook.org/Consumerpedia. Consumerpedia, empowering consumers to save money and make smarter choices.